Good.
I will be giving over a siche, a shir of the Rebbe, of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, which is a Siyum, a Hadran, on Mesechta Shabbos. This siche, which this shir, the Rebbe said on Shabbos, Parsha Shlach Tovshin Chov Beis, and is printed in Lekutei Siches, Chelek Yudalet, Parshas Vaeschanan. Since Parshas Vaeschanan has the Aseret Adibris, and one of the Aseret Adibris is about Shabbos, so that's why in this Parsha Vaeschanan, Lekutei Siches, Chelek Yudalet, this Hadran was printed. Now we'll repeat the Hadran, go into the details of what the Rebbe explained concerning the end of Mesechta Shabbos. The last Mishnah in Mesechta Shabbos says, "Umayse b'mei oviv shel Reb Tzodik u'b'mei Abishol ben Botni shepokaku es hamoer b'tofiach b'koshres hamekida b'gemi leida em yesh b'gigis b'seich tefach halei." Now what this means is, it's not exactly clear in the Mefarshim exactly the case, but more or less, there are different opinions. More or less, the pshat is like this. There were two houses next facing each other. And in the middle, there was a small path. And there was a window in the walls of both houses. Now, in the time of the Gemara, when it says a window doesn't mean with glass. It means a hole in the wall. There was a person who was very sick, and they saw that he's dying. And if he dies, the tumah might travel from where he is into the house. Because the din is that if there's a dead body under one roof with other things, the other things become tumah. This was a case where there was a path in between. On top of the path, there was a gigis. And the mess, they were afraid that it's going to die, or according to one opinion, was in the house across, or it was in the middle of the path. And since there's an open window, there's a hole in the wall of the next house, the tumah would travel. So the first thing they did before the person died, they stuffed up that window with a Chelek, klei cheres, with an earthen Chelek. Now, when does the tumah travel? Only if it's not stuffed, there'll be a hole. But if it's closed up, the tumah would not travel. But only if it's closed up with something that in itself cannot become tummy. Otherwise, the tumah goes through it. Now, a klei cheres, we know it doesn't become tummy from the outside. It only becomes tummy from the inside. So they took the klei cheres, they put it into the hole, with the inside of the klei cheres facing the house, and outside, towards the path, was the back of the klei cheres, which can become tummy. So in their mind, if the person dies, the tumah will not go into the house. What happened? The person died, and they wanted to take it out. There's another way that the tumah would not travel in. If the cover that was over the mess in the path in between the two houses has an opening on top of Pesach Tefach Abet Tefach, then the tumah will go through that hole instead of going into the house. So if there is a Pesach Tefach on top of that gigis, which covers the path where the mess is, or the mess was in the house and the tumah would go through here, if there's a Pesach Tefach there, then the house would not become tummy. And so b'meila, they could take out the kela that they stuffed the hole. So they had to measure to see if in the opening on top of in that gigis was a Pesach Tefach. So what they did was, they took a stick and they tied another kela with a gemi. A gemi is a reed, which is not a real tying. And they tied it on the stick. And with the stick, they took the kela and tried to push it, put it down, that should go through the hole of the gigis on top of the mess, or the area where the mess, the tumah would go. Now this thing that kela that they took was a tefach. So if it'll go through, that means that the opening is a tefach. So what they did was, let's read the Mishnah again. The story happened that pokaku es hamoer, they stuffed up the window, the hole in the wall, the tofiach, which is a pach cheres, a jug of cheres, they stuffed it up. And then, koshrus hamekido, they tied the mekida, which is another klei cheres, with a gemi, which is a reed, to know im yesh b'gigis pesach tefach alei, to know that whether in this gigis, which covered that path, whether it has a tefach or not. That's the story. And then the Mishnah continues, and from these words, from this story, we learned out that you're allowed to stuff up a hole in the wall on Shabbos, you're allowed to measure on Shabbos, and you're allowed to tie on Shabbos, which means that on Shabbos, you're allowed to stuff up a hole, even though it could be something like building. Nevertheless, we see that you're allowed. You're allowed to measure. Normally, you're not allowed to do a measurement. You're not allowed to measure on Shabbos. But here, the tzorech mitzvah, you were allowed. As we see they did, they took it to measure the hole. And here it's tzorech mitzvah because it's in order to find out whether there's tumah in halacha or not. And also, you're allowed to tie a knot of a kesher sheina shel kayome, which means like this, that midaraisa, we know, one of the malachas is Keshira. You're not allowed to tie, you're not allowed to make a knot. But it's only if it's a kesher shel kayome. If you make it, a ma'isa umen, that's the halacha. Ma'isa umen means if it's a real knot, a double knot. But it's only chayiv and only osir midaraisa if you, when you make the knot, you tie it, you have in mind never to untie it. Forever it should stay. But if it's a kesher she'ein shel kayome, if it's a knot that's not, you plan to take it apart, so then midaraisa it's not osir. It's only osir midarabana. So what we see here they made this knot, which is not a kesher shel kayome. It was made with a gemi, so it's not a kesher shel kayome. And they were allowed to do it on Shabbos. So we see that l'tzorech mitzvah, this was l'tzorech mitzvah, they were allowed to do a kesher she'ein shel kayome on Shabbos l'tzorech mitzvah. And the Gemara take there, and Zainam at Beis, and that's how brought down the Rambam, Shulchan Aruch says like this, that when we say that you're allowed to do a medida, we see from here you're allowed to measure on Shabbos, it's only if it's l'tzorech mitzvah, like it was over there. When it says that you're allowed to make a kesher she'ein shel kayome in this case, it says clearly in Shulchan Aruch, it's only l'tzorech mitzvah. But when it comes to stuffing up the hole, which is kike, so Tosfos says in the end of the Mesechta Shabbos, Tosfos also says it earlier, that you're allowed to do it even if it's not tzorech mitzvah, even if it's not tzorech mitzvah. And the logic over there in Tosfos is because if it's forbidden and it's considered like part of a binyan, they wouldn't allow it even tzorech mitzvah. So if they did allow it tzorech mitzvah, obviously it's not because it's a mitzvah, because that wouldn't be a good enough reason to allow it. Asiman, that's mutter. Asiman, in a case like this, to stuff up a hole is mutter. That's what the end of the Gemara is, Mesechta Shabbos. Now, the question that comes up is, what is the reason why, when the Mishnah brings out the halacha after it tells us the story that happened, the seder is that from here we know that you're peikakin, which is stuffing up the hole, you're allowed to stuff the hole on the wall, meidadin, you're allowed to measure, and keshrin, you're allowed to tie. What's the seder of these three things? Because when we look at the maisa happened like this. First, they stuffed up the hole. Then they tied the kele to the stick. And then they measured to see if there's a pesach tefach. So really, when the Mishnah learns out the halacha from here, the Mishnah should have said that from here we see that peikakin and keshrin, first the peikakin, the first, keshrin, then it should say the knot, make a knot, she'ein shel kayome, you're allowed to do it with tzorech mitzvah. That was the next thing that happened. And then the last thing should be made it, and then they measured it. In other words, like this, the reason the first one of the three is peikakin is understood, because that's the seder the way it was. But the other two don't fit to the seder. So it should have said the opposite. That's the simple shaila. Now, be'emes, there's another reason why peikakin is first. Not only because in Maisa it happened first. There's another reason why it's written first. And that's based on the Tosfos in Mesechta Kedushin. In Mesechta Kedushin, Daf Mem Aleph Omid Aleph, the Mishnah says that Ish Mekadesh Beye B'Shluchai. A man could be Mekadesh a woman himself, or he sent a Shliach. And the Gemara asks, Hash B'Shluchai Mekadesh Beye Boye. If you could be Mekadesh with a Shliach, for sure you can Kadesh yourself. In other words, the Gemara's kasha is that if it would have said the Ish Mekadesh B'Shluchai, you wouldn't need to say Beye. Because if you Mekadesh your Shliach, you know yourself. So Tosfos asks, the Chura, you could say that it's Leizu Avzu. He's telling us like this. Leizu, not only this, first he's telling you the ding that you could do it yourself. Now he's telling us the Chidush. The Chidush is written later, which from Tosfos comes out and that's the way Meforshim learn another Svarim, that Tosfos Kasha, and then you have Tosfos Teres. The Teres of Tosfos is like this. By two words, we don't have it in this Seder. By two words, we don't have to say first the din and then we say the chidush. That's what the Gemara asks. It shouldn't have said Beya b'shluchei. Now you can learn the kasha in two ways. It shouldn't have said Beya at all, just b'shluchei, or even if it would say both, it should say first shluchei and then Beya. And Tosfos explains why. Because by two words, you have to write the chidush first, the one that's a bigger chidush. And here, a bigger chidush is shluchei. Now, even though this Tosfos is basically answering, the Gemara is really talking, it shouldn't say the word bay at all. But from the way Tosfos writes it, it seems that there is a klal here. Because whenever you have two words, one is a bigger chidush than the other, which one should be written first? The chidush should be written first. That's what Tosfos says. That by shtei teves, we always should write the chidush first. Now, between these three, which one is the bigger chidush? When we have these three dinim of peikekin and meidadin and keshrin. So, peikekin is a bigger chidush. Why? Because as we said before, this din that you're allowed to stuff the hole in the wall on Shabbos is even if it's not Seirach Mitzvah. That's a big chidush. And as we said before, because if it would be a problem of binyan, the way Tosfos says, you wouldn't do it with Seirach Mitzvah either. So the fact that Yasimid, you're allowed to do it, that's a big chidush, that you could even do it if it's not with Seirach Mitzvah. But this din of that you're allowed to measure medida and you're allowed to make the knot, it's only with Seirach Mitzvah. So according to this Tosfos in Kedushin, that you, like two words, you always write the chidush first. So here, when we're talking about specific words, not whole cases, not whole bobas, but words, peikekin comes first. That's the biggest chidush. So we're saying now another reason why the Mishnah brings peikekin first. Not only because that's what happened first, because that's a bigger chidush. So we have another reason why peikekin is first. But that doesn't answer the question why later on we say the next thing is we say made it in vacation first, made it in vacation. This svara doesn't apply because they both seem to be an equal chidush. And if it's an equal chidush, which one should be written first? The one that happened first. So it should say peikekin and keshrin, because keshrin happened right after they stuffed up the hole, and then would be made it the last thing. So l'chure, it should write first keshrin and then made it in. Now, the emes, between the two of keshrin and meidadin, which one is a bigger chidush? So we said till now they're both equal. So they're both equal. They should be written according to the way the Maisa happened. So it should be peikekin and then should be keshrin the meidadin. But be'emes, it's more than that. In the heter of keshrin, the fact that you're allowed to make a kesher, she'ein shel kayome, l'tzeirach mitzvah, is a bigger chidush with the fact that you're allowed to be meided l'tzeirach mitzvah. Why? Because when we talk about the Isser of Medida b'Shabbos, the Isser that you're not allowed to measure on Shabbos, so the reason it says in Shulchan Aruch, try to quote the way the Alter Rebbe writes, it makes it very clear. So he writes in Siyum Shin Vov, the Alter Rebbe writes like this, because to measure is a weekday thing. It's a zilzal, it's not such covet for Shabbos. That's the whole Isser of Medida. But when it comes to the Isser of making a knot, which is Osir Midirabonon. So here the Alter Rebbe writes the Loshen, because Midivrei Seifrim Nikro Ze Gam Keshel Kayome. Even if it's not a Kesher Shel Kayome, but Midirabonon, it's still considered Midirabonon a Kesher Shel Kayome. Which means, because it's similar to a Kesher Shel Kayome, that's why the Rabbanon asked it. So it comes out, which of the two is more reason to be Osir? So it comes out that to make a Isra of Keshira, to do the Keshira, She'ein shel kayome, which is also Rabbanon, is worse than doing Medida. In other words, if you're not doing it, let's say Rech Mitzvah, which you're talking, not allowed to do both. You're not allowed to do a Kesher She'ein shel kayome, and you're not allowed to do a regular Medida. Which one is worse? So it seems like that the Keshira is worse, because Keshira is more similar to Isa Daraisa. It's close to a Kesher shel kayome. Masha'enkein Medida is just a side thing because it's a zilzal in Shabbos. So since Keshira is more reason for Isur, so in the case of Tzerech Mitzvah, where the Chachamim were matir it, it's a bigger Chiddush. So to be matir Keshira is a bigger Chiddush than to be matir Medida, let's say Tzerech Mitzvah. So based on the klal that we said before from Tosfos, that when it talks by single words, you write the Chiddush first. So it should have written the heter of Keshira before the heter of Medida, because that's a bigger Chiddush. So based on this also, it should have said that Medivreim Lomadnu Shepekikin, the Keshrin, Umedin B'Shabbos. Pekikin is first because that's how it happened, but besides that, it's first because that's the biggest Chiddush. And then it should say that you're allowed to be Kesher and allowed to be made it for two reasons. Number one, that's the way it happened. And besides that, as we just said, there's a bigger Chiddush in the union of Keshira that you're allowed to do it, let's say, more than by Medida, and the Chiddush has to be written first. Now, it seems that this is a digduk, a small, we call it digduk aniyas. It's not such a tife kasha in lomdis. It's a kasha only in the l'shenis of the Gemara, and not even in the loshen. It's just in the seder of the words. Not a major kasha. But as we will see, this has to do with the whole geder of the melacha Keshira on Shabbos, as we will see. So it's not just a simple thing. It has to do with the whole inyan of what is the reason for the melacha of Keshira on Shabbos, a kesher shel kayome, and then we'll understand the kesher shel kayome, and then we'll understand tzerich mitzvah, etc., as we will go on. Now, to explain this, we know that by a Hadran, by a Siyum, we always connect the end of the Mesechta to the beginning of the Mesechta. Like it says, notes, chilosim, b'seifon. So we always connect the beginning and the end. So let's start with the beginning of Mesechta Shabbos. The beginning of Mesechta Shabbos, first Mishnah, talks about the Meleches Heitzah, the Melech of carrying out from one Rishus to another. Now we know that Mideraisa, the Isur of Heitzah, let's say from Rishus HaYochid, Rishus HaRabim, Rishus HaRabim, Rishus HaYochid, is only if you make an Akira in Anocha. It means you make an Akira, let's say by Heitzah, you make an Akira in the Rishus HaYochid, you pick it up from a resting place in the Rishus HaYochid, you carry it out to the Rishus HaRabim, and you make an Anocha, you put it down. The same thing is opposite by Hachnosa, when you take it from Shram Shayochid, same thing by Daladam. It has to be an Akira with an Anocha, that's the din. But what happens if you do Heitzah or Hachnosa, and you did not do an Akira and Anocha? Let's say you did only an Akira, you picked it up in the Rishus HaYochid, took it out of Shram, but didn't put it down. Midaraisa, it's not Osir, it's Mutter. It's Isur Rabbanon. And the first Mishnah of Shabbos talks about it, tells us that this is a Isur Rabbanon only. If it's Akira and Anocha, it's Isur Deraisa, and you're Chayev, but it's Isur, it's Akira without Anocha, Anocha without an Akira, it's only Isur Rabbanon. So here we have the famous Kasha. Why is it Akira without an Anocha, Anocha without an Akira, also not Osir Midaraisa, mitzad the din of Chotzi Shir? We know there's a din Chotzi Shir Osir Min HaTorah. In Gemara in Yuma, Lafayin Dalet, there's a machlekes between Rabbi Vaeschanan and Mishlokish. There it talks about Yom Kippur, but anything that has a shir, when you eat non-kosher food, you eat on Yom Kippur, there's a certain shir that you're chayev if you do that. What about less than the shir? So we know to eat less than the shir also osir. You're not chayev the einish, you're not punished for it, but it's also osir. The question is, it is osir mit HaTorah or osir mit HaRabbanon? So you have a machlekes v'shlokish and Rabbi Vaeschanan. Shlokish says chotzi shir osir mit HaRabbanon. The Rai says takamuter. The Rabbanon made it osir. And Rabbi Vaeschanan says chotzi shir osir min HaTorah. So it's Isur Deraisa. You're not Chayev, but it's Isur. So the question is, why is an Akira without a Hanocha by Hitzor, or Hanocha without an Akira, only Osir mit HaRabbanon? Why is it not Osir al Chotzi Shir? You did half of it. So you did Chotzi, and Chotzi Shir is also Osir. Now the truth is, there are some opinions that hold that the whole din of Chotzi Shir is only said by Midat Achile, things of food, but it's not said by Yisur Shabbos. But there are many poskim hold not like that. Rasha in Shabbos, Daf Ayin Dalad Amad Aleph, Rasha holds that there's Chotzi Shir even by Shabbos. The Meiri and Daf Gimel Amad Beis, Yosef England, Lekachtev, Klal Tes, Sivot talks about it. Then you have the Agoy Soshin, the end of Peder Klal Godel, and the beginning of Peder Kamitzi Yayin, Korban Sanald. Anyway, so they all hold that there is Chotzi Shir also by Shabbos. The Alter Rebbe says that. Alter Rebbe in Shulchan Aruch, Siman Shin Lamed Vov, says clearly, he says that the shir that you're chayiv for writing is 2 letters, but you're not allowed to write 1 letter either, midaraisa, because it's chotzi shir. You're not the isra of geziza, cutting hair of a living thing. The shir is you're chayiv only when you cut 2 hairs. But he says you're not allowed to cut 1 hair midaraisa because of chotzi shir. So we see the Alter Rebbe also paskins that chotzi shir applies by Shabbos. Now we know that the Shittas Rambam and the Chaim, Reb Nachum Zembe talks about it. Anyway, but many poskim hold that there is a din of chotzi shir also by Shabbos. So the question is, why is there no isur midaraisa to do an akira without the hanoch without an akira by hitzoah when it's chotzi shir? And the answer is, the lashon is chotzi shir osher min haTorah, half of the shir. That means that whatever you did has the full-fledged quality of the isur. What's missing is the quantity, the measurement amount. Like when you eat, the shir is a kazayis. Half a kazayis has the same quality of the food. If it's straight for food, it's the same quality, whether it's big or small. What it's missing is in the kamos. That's not the eichus. It's missing in the kamos. So then we say, chotzi shir, since you did the whole isur, so that, and since it has the whole isur by eichus, even though it doesn't have the shir, it's also midaraisa. But by the case of akira without a hanocha, akira itself or hanocha itself, is chotzi melocha, it's not chotzi shir. It doesn't have the full-fledged melocha. It's not the pshat that has the full melocha, but it doesn't have the quantity. It's half of the eichos of the quality and the geder of the mahus of the pa'ula of the act of caring. Therefore, it's not osir midaraisa. That's when again the beginning of Mesechta Shabbos. That why does the Mishnah say that akira itself, hanoch itself, is only osir midarabanan? Because it's a chotzi melocha, not a chotzi shir. Chotzi shir would be osir midaraisa. Fine. We apply that to the end. The end is talking about keshira. So by keshira, as we said before, midaraisa, it's only osir if it's a kesher shel kayome. A kesher sheina shel kayome, it's not osir midaraisa. It's osir midarabanan. The question is the same question. Why can't we say that a kesher sheina shel kayome is osir midaraisa al chotzi shir? Because it's missing half. Part of it you did. So it's chotzi shir and chotzi shir osir midaraisa. The answer is the same as we said b'negeya, akira, and hanoch itself. That if you're missing the das of a chebi shel kayome, it's not that you're missing just in the shir. You're missing in the mahus of the malacha. This inyan of being a kesher shel kayome, that's part of the mahus of the malacha. The malacha of keshira is if you have the das sheyishoyer kein la'ilam, and it should say like that forever. That's part of what the malacha is. And if you're missing that, you're missing part of the malacha. That's why it's not osir midaraisa. It's only osir midarabanan. It can't be osir al chotzi shir. Now the truth is, someone might ask at l'chura, we could look at the keshira kesher sheina shel kayome as a chotzi shir, because it's brought down the Shulchan Aruch. The Alter Rebbe brings it in the Shulchan Aruch. The Simon Zion, Sif Allah. The Alter Rebbe says like this: if you make a knot, and he says im keitzav bedaite eizes man shoz yaterena bevadai. If you, when you make the knot, you make up your mind that there's a certain time you're going to take it apart. Afilu uzman oruch me'ed, even if it's for a long time. Eizeh shel kayom min haTorah. It's not called kesher shel kayom min haTorah, and it's spotted. The Rabbanan said this is also called shel kayom, but midaraisa it's not. So l'chura it comes out that midaraisa you're chayiv if you have in mind that you will have this kesher for a very, very long time, forever, for a long time. If you have in mind to have less than that, so it's part of the shir. In other words, the shir is if you have it for a long time, for no end, and this is part of that shir. So the chura by kesher, you could look at it as chotzi shir. It should be a chotzi shir. It's half of the shir, because the shir is forever, and this is less. So why are we saying it's not chotzi shir? It's half of the mahus of the malacha. So the answer is the difference is not in shir. That this is for a long shir, and if you have in mind to take it off in a week, a month, whatever it is, it's called part of the shir. If it's kesher shel kayome, it's a different mohus, a different thing of the kesher. It means it's going to be a knot that's going to stay there without any changes. Not it's a time thing. How long will it be? Will it be for 10 years, or will it be now for a month? Or it'll be for a lot of years. It's not the difference between kesher shel kayome and kesher shel kayome. Kesher shel kayome means forever. That means it's a knot, that's it. It's staying that way. There is no shear there. And if you do it for less than that, it's a different thing. It's a different mahus of a thing. And that's why it's not osir midaraisa. It's al derech, like Shuvas Harashba, it's in a different Inyan. Shuvas Harashba in Chelek in Tes. So there he says, the posuk where it says, Atahush neisechel lo yatom, it says on the Eibishter that you and your years will never stop. So he teaches, it's not the pshat, it's going to be a very, very long time. More than other things which will stop, which have agbola. It's a different mahus. It's a different kind of thing. We find it in other places also. Ubemela, we understand why there is no deen of Chotishir should be also medaraisa by the case of the Keshira. So we know why there's no Chotishir in the Geya and Akira and Anocha itself, not in Akira with Anocha, and the same thing here also. But what we have to understand now, if we compare the two, the Kesher Sheni Shel Kayome, that's not Chotishir, that's Chotzim Melocha and also Medarabonon, and we compare it to the Inyan of Hanocha and Akira itself, to also not being Chotishir, but it's Chotzim Melocha, and it's also Medarabonon. Why is there a difference between the two? When you get the Melocha of Hitzah, of carrying, with Akira and only or Anocha itself, which is also Medarabonon, as we said, it's also even Seirech Mitzvah. Adarabe, Meforshim explain, like the Meiri and the Tanura and the Teisvis Yontif, all in the beginning of Mesechta Shabbos, when the Mishnah tries to give us the example of doing an Akira with Anocha Akira, with Ad Anocha, it talks, and by Akira with Anocha is the Raisa, this is the Rabbanon. It gives an example of two people, one standing outside, one standing inside. The one from inside is in the Vishachayochi, the one outside is Shusarabim, and it goes into the cases what happens there. But the way it says is that if the poor man is standing outside, the rich man is standing, the balabos is standing inside, and the question is, if the rich man, the balabos inside, picked it up inside and put it down on outside in his hand, whatever, if he didn't, it's Rabbanon. Why did the Mishnah give an example of a poor man and old man? What's the chilek, poor or old? Might not communicate these two things. So the Mefarsh will say, to teach you, when you give money to a poor man, you're doing the mitzvah of tzedakah. To tell you that this Iser the Rabbanon, if you do only a Hanoche or only Nakira, which is not Osir the Rais, only Osir the Rabbanon, is even if it's Seirech Mitzvah. That's why it says there. So here we see that the Iser of the Chotzi Melocha, of Hanoche itself, Akira itself, is Osir with the Rabbanon, even Seirech Mitzvah. But by Keshira, as we said, Seirech Mitzvah is mutter. We said Kesher Shemin Shel Kayame is also, we said, a Chotzi Melocha. And it's also with the Rabbanon, but Seirech Mitzvah, it's mutter. What is the difference? That's the shayla we have to, we compare them, what is the difference? So, the difference is like this. They're both Osir with the Rabbanon, but the reason why they're Osir is not the same reason. And let's look at the reason, not the same category of reason actually. Let's look at the reason. When a Geya making an Akira itself or Anoch itself, the reason is, Rashi says, and our base in Shabbos, that it's a Gzeira, Shema Yoveyu Kol Echod Ve'echod Lases Meloch Shlema B'Shabbos. We're afraid that if we're going to allow you to do an Akira itself, you might make an Anoch also, and you will be able on the Isur Daraisa. The truth is, the Alter Rebbe in Shulchan Aruch Siman Shimem Zayin Sif Aleph calls the Lashon of Rashi. He adds one word. Rashi says, Shema Yoveyu Kol Echad Ve'echad Lases Meloch Shlema B'Shabbos. Rashi, the Alter Rebbe adds, Shema Yoveyu Kol Echad Ve'echad Mehem Lases Meloch Shlema B'Shabbos. One of them. And L'chura, he's trying to add to tell us Pshat. Because there is a whole Shakla V'Tarya in the Meforshim, in the Gei Rashi and Teisos and Shabbos of Gimel Madalef in P'turah Dosil, but in that Teisos, that Rashi. So there's a Shaila, an Akira without the Anochi, we know what the Gzeira is. If you allow someone to make an Akira itself, so he might make the Akira and then continue making an Anochi. That's a Gzeira. But if you make an Anochi without an Akira, what can happen? You made the Anochi, it's finished. So what the Pashta seems to be that someone else will see you making a Hanocha without an Akira, and that's okay. He will go ahead and make an Akira with a Hanocha. You go a step further. It's not only a question for someone else, a question for this guy himself. If we allow him to make a Hanocha by itself, next time, he himself will make an Akira with a Hanocha. So the Alter Rebbe adds the words, Shema Yoveyu Kol Echad Ve'echad Mehem, to tell you that it's not only a Gzeira for somebody else. Kol Echad Ve'echad Mehem, every one of these. The one that made Akira itself might make Akira with Hanocha, and the one that made only Hanocha might make an Akira with Hanocha next time. But anyway, that's not the game. The bottom line is that the reason why you're not allowed to mitarabon do an akira by itself, anoch itself, it's a gzeira you might come to do a meloch on Shabbos. The reason why a kesher she'ein shakayome is osur. So here, the reason is because, as we said before, medibri sofrim nikro ze gamkin kayome, shakayome, hail ve'emed leiskayem ezesman. It's called shakayome. Midarabonon, it's called shakayome. It's not just two different reasons. There are two categories of reasons. Now I'll explain what I mean. We see in the Rambam, in the beginning of Perek Chof Aleph in Hilchos Shabbos, where he starts off about the dvarim that are osem midrabanan, the Rambam says like this. Nemar b'Torah, it says in the Torah, tishbeis. Afilim b'dvarim she'eina malacha chayiv lishbeis mahem. But even things which are not a malacha, the Torah wants you to rest from them. And then the next words are the important words. He says like this. Udvarim harbehein she'osr chachamim mishum shvus. Many things that Rabbanan forbid because of the shvus. And then he says, mehem, some of them that they forbid, is dvarim asurim mipnei she'im deimim limlachas. They're also because they are similar to a malacha deraisa. Umehem, and some things are dvarim asurim gzeira shemayovim amisas kila. It's because we're afraid you might come to it. So the Rambam makes it very clear that there are two categories in the Surah Rabbanon. Certain things are osur, not because we're afraid this will bring you to Isa Daraisa. It's because it looks like a Malacha Daraisa. Since it's Daimid, the Chachamim Asad. And certain things is because it's a Gzeira, you might come to a Isa Daraisa Skila. And actually, when you go through the whole Perek, the different examples that Rambam gives, which things are osur with the Rabbanon, so it's very interesting. Some places, the Rambam writes that the reason this and this is osur, because it's like an Isa Daraisa. Sometimes he says this is also Gzeira Mishum, Gzeira Shema. So if you look through the Perek Chof Aleph, Perek Chof Beis, Perek Chof Gimel, you'll see. So the Rambam obviously is machalik the two. In other words, those things which are osur because they're Deimel Malach, it's not a Gzeira that you might come to Isa Daraisa. Because if that is, then why divide it into two categories? Everything is osur because you might come to Isa Daraisa. Asimah from the Rambam that it's not so poshut. Those things which are osur because they're Deimel Malach is not because they'll come to Isa Daraisa. It's only Daimel Malach. And certain things are also. Now that is basically difference between the two categories of Isa Rabbanan that we're talking about, Akira without the Anocha, the Gabe Keshira Shokayome, Sheina Shokayome. That the case of Anocha without an Akira, Akira without an Anocha is Osir, says clearly, because you might come to Isa Daraisa. That's the Gzeira, you might come to Isa Daraisa. Mashenkin, the Keshira Shokayome, the lotion there is because it looks like a deraisa. It looks like a kesher shokayom. So, but the Rabbanan, they'll refer to it as a kesher shokayom, not because we're afraid it'll come to it. And that is the answer. Since the malacha of Keshira is not because of a gzeira, you might come to Isa deraisa. It's only because it's similar to Isa deraisa. So here, it's not as strict because it's not a gzeira, you might come to Isa deraisa. So here, it's much more svara to say that certain cases you're allowed to do it. It's like a osir because it looks like, but it's not going to bring you. We're not afraid it's going to bring you. We don't have that gzeira. So tzedach mitzvah, it's mutter. That's why by Kira and Anocha, that's why by Keshira, I mean, it's mutter l'tzedach mitzvah. Mashenkim melechas akira. Without the Anocha, we're there, the osir is because you might come to Isa Daraisa. So here it's worse, because you might come to Isa Daraisa. So here the Rabbanan weren't makel even tzedach mitzvah. So again, by Kesher Sheina Shel Tayome, which is only osir because it's daimel l'malacha, we understand we could be makel by tzedach mitzvah. Mashenkim by the case of Anocha and Akira by itself, there it's Shema Yove, you might come to Isur Deraisa, and there even Tzedach Mitzvah is also. So this answers it. But the question is, this itself needs an explanation. Why Taka didn't they make a Gzeira by Akira itself and Anocha itself? I mean by Keshira, Kesher Sheina Shokayom, sorry, by Kesher Sheina Shokayom. L'chure, just like they made the Gzeira by the case of Shema Yove to make a malacha by Akira and Anocha, why by Kesher they didn't do the same thing? By the Kesher Sheina Shokayome, you might come to make a Kesher Shokayome. Why don't you make that Gzeira? So the fact is, we see in the Rambam, and the Alter Rebbe brings that that's not because of the Gzeira. But the question is, why not? Why don't you make a Gzeira here? Just like you make a Gzeira over there. And not only that, it's a Kal V'chomer. By Akira itself, or Anocha itself, in order to be able to Isa Deraisa, what has to happen, you have to do something else. By Akira, it's mutter Akira, you have to do something else to be able. So we're afraid you might do something else. Same thing if you only make Anocha, we're afraid the next time you do something, you make an Akira and Anocha. By the Keshira Shakayama, it's much easier to be able to Deraisa, because the Mloch is the same. You might think that it's going to be forever. So this is more reason, seemingly, why we should make a Gzeira. So why didn't we make a Gzeira here? Now, why am I saying that there's a svara why bedafka here there should be more reason to make a Gzeira than there? Because otherwise, the kasha wouldn't be such a good kasha. Because there's a Tosfos in a few places. Shabbos daf chav gimel lamed beis, you have Tchum daf chav dalet, and Nida daf lamed gimel. Tosfos says, "Shema ein lahashves gzeira shel chachamim zu lezu." Eisem sheinim amloch echas. It's hard to compare gzeiras. One place they did make a gzeira, another place they didn't. So we can't ask a kasha. How come by the case of the kasha shein shakama we didn't make a gzeira? By the case of malach we didn't make a gzeira. Tosfos says we can't be mashva gzeira zelazeh. But we have to understand the pshat there is that stam hazeh we can't just mashma and say how come they didn't do here they do here. But it doesn't mean that when there is a svara, there is a stira. One is a stira to the other. When we see a svara that if in one place they made, the other one has the same thing and much more, then we have to explain it. If there's no stira, no kashas, just want to know why did they do here. Don't ask kashas. We don't know exactly what happened with the chacham so. But here, when you have a stira, so that's what I'm saying. Here there's a kal v'chomer, there's a stira between the two. If by a case where we're afraid you might come to do another pool, we make a gzeira. So in the case where to do the Isa that I says, you don't even have to do another pool. It's a svara. So l'chura, they certainly should make a gzeira. So the shaila is why didn't they? So we have the svara that they're different. That's why one is also hanocha kira hanoch is also l'tzerich mitzvah, and kshira it's not because this is not a gzeira. The question is now why taka didn't the chachamim make a gzeira here? So we have to answer that shaila. So we have to explain to understand. In order to explain this, you have to first understand what is the svara. Why is only an iser by a kesher shakayama? Why is the iser only by a kesher shakayama? Let's go in the Mach of Keshira. Why is it only also kesher shakayama? Now it's not a kasha. Why? I'm using the wrong words actually. Why is because since we learned it out from the Mishkan, all the malachs in the Mishkan there was a kesher shakayama, so that's why it's kesher shakayama. Now the shaila is not why is it the shaila. What's the hasbara behind it? What's the svara? Okay, we see there is like a raya that it's only a kesher shakayama, and Eidish shakayama shouldn't be also. But what's the logic? It's the same thing. What you have in your mind? It should be the same. When will we understand what's the svara for a kesher shakayama? We'll understand why there is no gzeira by kesher shein shakayama. It's only because it's daimer. Now I want to add something else, something a svara that I have on my own, not from the original place where I took this. I'm taking the shear from, and I'm saying it's my own because we should understand that there's a difference between when I say the Rebbe says and when I say myself. They say that Rabbi Kiviga said to Talmidim, Zay Zokman, that I don't mind if you say over my chidushim in your name. Just don't say your chidushim in my name. Because, there's a difference, chidushim of the Talmidim and the Rabbi Kiviga himself. So here also, I want to say what I'm going to add now to this is what I'm saying, what I think myself. Why is it that we're looking for a reason here? Saying we understand from where we got this, that kesher shakayam only is also kesher shakayam that I said. But we're saying, what's asbara? Why do we even need asbara? Okay, it's not a kasha why we need asbara. It's always good to have asbara if you're able to have. But I'm saying in this case, it's not only it's good to have asbara, it's be'emes a need for asbara. Why? I'll tell you why. But emes, we all know what it says in the beginning of Mesechta Shabbos when it talks about Hitzah. So we have there Tosfos and all the Rishonim. They claim that the Melacha of Hitzah is Melacha Gerua. It's a bad Melacha. It's a Shvacha Melacha. It's a weak Melacha, not a real Melacha. What does that mean? I want to explain what that means. Everyone knows, but I'll just explain it anyway. What it means it's a Melacha Gerua. Because L'chura, you have to understand B'chlal. Where do we know that you're not allowed to do Lamates Melachas? From the Mishkan. Whatever was done in the Mishkan when they build the Mishkan, those are called Melachas. But the Shaila is, there were so many things done in the building of the Mishkan, besides these 39 things. They used to walk and they used to do this, and they slept this here, they put this there. I mean, when you do things like that, it's only these 39 things they did. Well, the answer is Bepashtas. The Lashon the Gemara in Shabbos Daf Tzadik Vov and in Babakamat Daf Beis in the beginning, Kol Lashon is whatever was Have b'Mishkan Chashive, whatever was Choshev in the Mishkan, that's a Malacha. What does that mean, Mishkan Choshev? It means like this. The Chachamim looked at what was done in the time when they built the Mishkan. Well, they assumed all the different things we see. Not everything becomes a Malacha. Why? Only things which have a Teichen of a Malacha. And if it wasn't the Mishkan, so that becomes a Malacha from the Lamed Tes Malachas. What is the Teichen of Malacha? What makes it Choshev? Have a Mishkan Chashive. And that is, the reason we keep Shabbos and we can't do Malach is because David didn't Malach on Shabbos. David rested. So from there, we learn out that anything that was done in the Mishkan, and it has the characteristic, the quality of changing something, similar to the Eibush that created the world. So the Eibush changed. There was no world, he made a yesh miyayin, he made a yesh. So anything that we do, which makes a change, rather nothing creates yesh miyayin by us, but it makes a change. Take a marshal, cooking. There's food, and when you cook it, there's a change. When you're right, before the words were not there, and here the words are there. So there is a real change of something that changed, that became. Only things like that. And the Chachamim looked into the Mishkan and saw there are 39 things there of a change. Now, Heitzah is the only one that Tosfos says in the beginning, the Rishonim say that we can't learn it out of the Mishkan. It has to have a posik for it. Why? Because it's a Melacha Gerua. Carrying from one reshus to another is really not a change. There's nothing that happens. There's nothing that happens in the object that you carried. There's nothing that happened there. It's just from here to here. There's a change in place, but there's no real change in the thing. Like when you're right, there's a change. There was no words, now there are words. And that's why it's called a Melacha Gerua, because it doesn't have the teichen of Bria. No, this reminds me, there's a famous question people ask, not so from people, that why should striking a match nowadays be a Melacha deraisa? In the time when Chumash or the Gemara, there's a ganze chef, the whole thing, how to make a fire, you got to take rocks and you rub it next to each other and it goes, ganze Geschäft. That's a Melacha. But to make a fire nowadays, you strike a match. So the answer is, it's not because of the hardship of the Melacha that it's also, because it's hard. Not because it's hard. It's because it's creating. It's a Melacha of creation. In the letter, the Rabbi gives a different, same answer, but in different words. A very short answer. I saw the Ksav Yad of the Rabbi, someone asked him the same question, so he answers these words. As easy as it is nowadays to make a fire, for Hashem to create the world was even easier. And nevertheless, he rested. In other words, it's not hardship. And we see that in the Lashon of Tosfos. Tosfos Lashon is there. First, the Erzerua makes it even clear. The Erzerua in Hilchas Shabbos, Leches Hitzah, says, Ma Melacha Osa, Yikor HaChefetz V'Hashnam HaChefetz. Before it was a Chefetz, now it's also a Chefetz. Tosfos says, Malim Meitzim Rishus HaYochad Rishus HaRabim, Malim Meitzim Sheyachad Rishus HaYochad. What's the difference between taking out from Rishus HaYochad HaRabim or from Rishus HaYochid to Rishus HaYochid? Which means to say, it's the same thing. There's no real difference. The Rashba says it even more. The Rashba says, Ilu Ponam Ezovis Ezovis Masa Godel. If you take from one corner to another in the house, a big load, potter. Hate success meshus rishus chayiv. If you take it out from a small thing, from one rishus to another, you're chayiv. Because the Megeder of the Malacha is not the taich, it's hard or it's easy. It's the Gedder of the Malacha is the change, the creativity. The Rambam Mepirish HaMashnayis uses the Lashon, Am Heitzah hi Malacha, Afal Pi Shenireh Memen Ein Malacha. It's a Malacha that it doesn't look like a Malacha. It doesn't explain why. But the Pashta, this is the reason. It doesn't look like a Malacha because there's no change. So having said this, that the whole Gedder of a Malacha is the creativity of it, that's why we need a Shaila. That's why the Shaila is here. Why is Midaraisa only Osir a Kesher Shel Kayome? And if it's not Shel Kayome, why does that make a difference in the Teichen of Malacha? If you make a Kesher and you tie something, why is it that if it's you had in mind to take it apart in a week or whatever, then it's not really the teichen of a malacha. Why not? There must be hasbara. So I'm explaining deeper the shaila why we're looking for a hasbara, why only a kesher shel kayom is also midaraisa. So the explanation is as follows: the taich of a kesher is a tying two things together. Take two pieces of string or whatever, you tie it like two thread, you tie it together, and you make it into one. When you tie it, it becomes one. Now you cannot consider it that it's really became one. Call it a kesher amiti only if you put it there in order to remain forever. That means like this, that the fact that it has to be a das of kayoma, that it's going to stay like that forever, that's what makes it into a kesher. Otherwise, it's not called a kesher. Otherwise, all it is, imagine you take two pieces of thread, you put it together like this. You take one, touch to the other. It's nothing. So even if you tie it, but if you didn't have a mind, it's not really called a kesher. So therefore, like this, if you have a mind to tie it and to take it apart, so even when they're tied together, while they're tied, a real tie, it's not called a chibur amiti, it's not a real connection, and it's not in the gather of Keshira the teirasa. So it doesn't have the quality of the malacha. When does it really become a thing? It's only if you make it and plan to leave it there. So from that comes out, we understand that if you don't have the das, that it should stay forever. So it's not the pshat, you're missing part of the malacha, part of the pula. The chatchila don't have the whole gather of the malacha to begin with, because they're not really tied. There's no tying here. It's only a putting together two threads or two things. That's all it is. And that's why it's also midaraisa only if it's a kesher shel kayomer. Just to give an example from other things to explain this idea. We have the famous Mishnah in Pora, Mishnah Tes, when again the Horus Hamachazvim. When you have to have tefillah, those that have to have tefillah in Mayim Chayim in a well, if it's a well that we know that within 7 years it's going to dry up, it's not called Mayim Chayim. You can't table it in it while it's there. Why not? When it'll dry up, but now it's there. It's real fresh, living water. It's not. Because if it's forever, if it's for no stop, that's one thing. That's Chayim. If it's going to stop, even though it's not stopped yet, but we know it's going to stop, it's not considered Mayim Chayim. Give another example that we see that how the das makes it. We know kol makalkel in pturin. When you makalkel on Shabbos, you do a malach on Shabbos, which spoils something, you're potim. That I say it's not osir. But if you makalkel on manas l'saken, if you do the kilkel with in mind to fix it, so even while it's being broken, it's called fixing. Because the kavona makes it that it's hatiku now. So here we see an example in the other direction, that the kavona now, to have it later, makes what it is now. Same thing for ketit. If the kavana now is taken apart, we look at it, it's as if it's apart already. Now, to give a better example in Arinian, is the famous Magid Mishnah. The Magid Mishnah in Perikut Beis of Hilchas Shabbos Halacha Beis, brought down in the Mogen Avram, Siman Shin Yud Chesed Koten Lamed Vov. The Rambam talks about it. In the Gei, the Malach of Tikkun Keilah. Interesting thing, very interesting thing. One of the Malachas is Tikkun Keilah, Makeh B'Patish, to fix a Keilah. You take something and it's broken and you fix it, that's a malacha deraisa. And the example would be give Makeh B'Patish. When they would make a keilah, after they finished doing it, they would take a hammer and give a bang. That didn't do anything much, but that was the end. If you do that, you're over on the isa deraisa. And similar, anything that you do that finishes the keilah, makes something fixed, is a malacha osem deraisa. Now here we see that the kavanah that you have to fix it is not the pshat, that's the kavanah of the malacha. That makes it into a malacha. By other malachas, it's not like that. Take the malacha of ksiva. What makes the malacha? The malacha is ksiva, right? Now you have to have kavanah. That's the kavanah of the malacha. The malacha is not the kavanah. The malacha is the fact that you're doing the pula, the act, the writing. The kavanah is the kavanah of it. By tikkun keilah, if you don't have that kavanah, you didn't do a malacha b'chlal. You could have two people do the exact same pool, exact. One did nothing, mitzad halacha, nothing wrong, and the other one is chayiv misa because it is the rice. The example I gave him banging with a hammer. Guy takes a hammer and takes a stomach kale there and get a hot with the hammer. Well, he said the rice, there was nothing there. This other guy took the same hammer, get the same bang, but the kale that he was finishing and gave the bang and kale, he's chayiv. So here, the shot is that the kavanah is part of the malacha. And the Maggid Mishnah says, because of that, there's a machlokes by Shabbos between the Buddha and Reb Shimon by einem miskaven. If you do a malacha, but you didn't intend to do it. So Rabbi Yehuda says it's still osir, still chayiv, and Reb Shimon says that it's mutter on Shabbos. It's einem miskaven. So the Maggid Mishnah says that by the malacha of tikkun keilah, even the Rabbi Yehuda will be made that if you didn't have the kavanah, you're not chayiv. Why? By other things where the kavanah is a kavanah of the maises, as long as you did the malacha, the fact that you didn't have the kavanah is not, it doesn't make a difference, and you're chayiv according to Rabbi Yehuda. But in the case of tikkun keilah, the kavanah is the malacha. Without the kavanah, it's not tikkun keilah. It's not b'chala malacha. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, you'd also be put. And go a step also further. According to Reb Shimon, who says einem miskaven is potter on Shabbos or mutter, whatever whichever way we're going to go. But if it's psik reisha, if you do it in a way that it has to happen, Reb Shimon is made. The made of Reb Shimon psik reisha. Look there in Mishnah that it's not like that. By tikkun keilah, even if it's a psik reisha, by tikkun keilah psik reisha doesn't make it, because since it's einem miskaven, it's a psik reisha. It must happen, but you weren't bechaven. So you didn't do a malacha. When does a psik reisha work? When you did the malacha. Elamai, there's missing kavanah, so the psik reisha makes it that you're chayiv. But by tikkun keilah, if you're einem miskaven, you didn't have a kavanah, you didn't do b'chal the pool of tikkun keilah. So this is another example of where we see that the kavanah is not just the kavanah of the malacha. It's a kavanah that is part of the malacha. So when I'm using this, the same thing here also, that the kavanah of Kesher shel kayom das, that it'll be forever, that kavanah makes the malacha of Keshira. Without it, it's not a Kesher b'chlal. Now, be'emes, by some say by other malachas also. The Moshel, the Merkevas HaMishnah, in Peter Gudel Shabbos Halacha Yitzayin Halacha Chav Gimel, wants to say the same thing by Melechas Tzeidah. What's the Melech of Tzeidah? You can't capture an animal. So what happens when an animal runs into a room and you lock the door? You're Eiver on Tzeidah. You captured it. So he wants to say that by Tzeidah is the same thing. Locking the door is nothing. Can't lock a door on Shabbos. So if you're mechaven to lock the door to catch the animal, then you did the Melechas Tzeidah. But if you weren't mechaven, there is no Melechas Tzeidah b'chlal. And he tries to answer based on kasha the Hadran asks in Shabbos Daf Kuvov and the Rashba concerning Yerushalmi. He goes that. But l'chura, it's a hard thing to say it, say such a pshat, because if by Tzeidah it's like that, then even according to Reb Shimon, who says Einem Miskaven is potter, but the psik reisha is also, as we said. But not by Tzeidah. If Tzeidah is this, that if you don't have the kavanah, it's not the malacha b'chlal. So just like by malachas tikkun keilah, if you didn't have the malacha for tikkun keilah, psik reisha won't make it osir. So the same thing would be by Tzeidah. Now the din is, it says in Gemara Beya Daf Lamed Vav Amud Aleph, and it's brought on the Shulchan Aruch, Al Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. It says like this: you're allowed to spread a machatzelis, like a cover, on top of a beehive of bees, as long as you're not mechaven to capture them, to hold them, to capture them. And it's not a psik reisha. But if it would be a psik reisha, it would be also midaraisa. Now we said, according to Keves HaMishnah, that by Tzeidah, without kavanah, it's not a malacha b'chlal, so there's no din of psik reisha. So what does it mean that if it has to be? When are you not chayiv if it's not psik reisha, but it's psik reisha chayiv? Good, okay, so it's another thing. So Leibel, the Shaila is be other malachas, but Leibel by Negei, I want to say that we find it by Melechas tikkun keilah, but here by Negei, the Melechas Keshira, I want to say that it's Melechas Keshira is the kavanah of Ke'ayome is part of the malacha. It's not only a Tanai in the malacha, that other malachas have certain conditions. It's not even a Tanai, it's not a Tanai in the malacha, it makes the malacha. Now this is a reason to explain why by the case of Tzeda, the Chachamim did not make a Gzeira. Our Shaila was, why didn't they make a Gzeira? You might, why, by Tzeda, we said it's, by Keshira Shkamer made a Gzeira, by Akira and Anocha made a Gzeira, by Tzeda they didn't make a Gzeira. By Keshira they didn't, why didn't they make a Gzeira? That if you make a Keshira Shkamer, you might come to make a Keshira Shkamer. Now we understand why. Because when did they make a Gzeira? When you do something which could bring you. That something is something. Kesher Sheina Shel Kayome is not part of a Kesher Shel Kayome at all. You didn't do anything. It has nothing to do with what a Kesher Shel Kayome is. That's why they didn't make a Gzeira that like what you did a beginning, you might come to do the end. It's take, in other words, to put it in other words, it's not even Chotzi Melacha. We asked the question, why by Akira and Fad Anocha they made the Gzeira and here not? By Akira with Ad Anocha, it's not Chotzi Shir, so it's not Osem Deraisa. But it is Chotzi Melacha. You did part of the physical Melacha. You did part of the Melacha. You did an Akira, which is part of the Melacha. In other words, like this, no matter how we learn what's the Ikir of the Melacha Vitzah, because we know in Achreinim there's a Akira, what's the Ikir of Melacha Vitzah? Ikir the taking from one Rishus to another, and there's a condition that it's only for Akira and Anocha. Or the Ikir is Akira, or the Ikir is Anocha, or both, or all three, whatever. Whichever way we learn, Hakol Meidim, it's for sure that the Akira itself is part of the Malacha. It's not, it's part of the Malacha, it's not part of the Shir. It's more than that, it's Chotzi Malacha. But it's part of the Malacha. So here, the Chachamim made the Gzeira, that even though you didn't do the other half of the Malacha, but you did part of the Malacha, so they made a Gzeira. Masha Enkein, in the Gei Keshira, when you did the Kesher Shein Shekayom, you didn't do it, it's not even Chotzi Malacha. You didn't even do part of the Malacha. Because the Kesher is not a Kesher if you didn't have a mind to be Shekayom, as we just said. But mainly if it's Kesher, that's the Danish Shekayom, is not the Geder Kesher Midaraisa, so the Rabbanan didn't make a Gzeira, because this is something else. They didn't make a Gzeira from far-fetched things. So we see at least a Chelek between the two. Now, what I just said now, that by a Kesher, the making the Kesher is not part of it. What do you mean it's not part of it? If a person will have a kavanah to make a Kesher Shel Kayome and not actually make a Kesher, he's not chayiv. So it is part of it. It is part of the Malacha. So how do we say that the Kesher itself without the kavanah is not a Malacha? So the answer is it's only part of it after you have the kavanah. The Kesher itself, mitzad atzmei, without the kavanah, is basically nothing. It's like nothing. But when you have the kavanah, then when you make the Kesher with the kavanah, the Kesher becomes. So the kavanah makes the Kesher into a Kesher, into a pool of a Malacha. Now, I want to add something else. Again, I'm saying this is something that I'm adding myself. That l'chura, it's still not so simple, because you could still ask. In halacha, the Kesher that you make is not a Malacha. It's nothing. But the Gashmi is you did something. You put together two things. Okay, it's not a Kesher. But you put together two things. That's part. When you make a Kesher, part of it is putting it together, and then you make the knot. So putting it is also part in the Gashmis. Now, when Akira and Anocha, l'chura, that's the same thing. Akira without Anocha is nothing. But I say it's no Malacha. So why am I saying it's half of the Malacha? There's no Malacha at all. So what's Sofkosov the difference between Akira and Anocha? We say that there, Sofkosov, each one is part of the Malacha, and here it's not. The Kesher itself is not part of the Malacha without the Kavanah. So that's almost like you would say, Bosar B'cholov is Osir. And Bosar itself is half of the Isur. And it's Mutter because it's only half of the Isur. Makes no sense. Bosar itself is nothing. Isur, Cholov itself is nothing. The whole Isur starts from both. So by Kira and Anocha should be the same. It's only Kira and Anocha. Nevertheless, we say no, it's called Chotzi Malacha. Why? Because the Gashmi is the putting together the two things, the doing the Akira and without the Anocha, the Gashmi is it's part of the act. Even though in Halacha it has no value, but it's part of the act, so we call it Chotzi Malacha. So why can't we say the same thing by the Kesher? So I'm just thinking myself, there's a little difference here. When you get Akira and Anocha, it's not a pshat that there is an Akira and that there's Anocha, they're two separate things. You got to do both in order to be chayiv. The way it says in some Achreinim that Akira is the beginning of the Hanocha, and the Hanocha is the end of the Akira. when you pick it up from some place and you put it down, the hanoche is a strong hanoche. The hanoche, when is something really called you're putting it down? When you took it from one place and you're putting it down. The same thing, the opposite. When you have akira is the beginning of the hanoche, and hanoche is the end of the akira. When is it really nekar? When is it considered you took it away? When you really put it down. So it comes out by akira and hanoche, it's more. And akira and hanoche, it's like it's half of the hanoche also. Akira is a beginning of potential of an akira and hanoche, because what is called a real akira when you plan to put it down? So mele, an akira by itself and hanoche by itself could be considered chotzi melacha. By shenkin a kesher, it's a thing for itself, and since it's nothing, it's just putting two things together. Like since it's not the kavana to keep it, so it's really just like putting it together. So therefore, there is no problem, and therefore it's not called that this is chotzi melacha, and that's why over here, since it's not chotzi, not even chotzi melacha, that's why midarabanan it's a mitzvah, it's mutter. And that's the answer that we're giving. We asked the shaila at the beginning, why is akira without hanocha also tzedach mitzvah? And by kesher, so we said the difference is because this is also akira without hanocha is also as a gzeire, and the kesher shein shagam is also only daime. And that's why this is so by kesher it's mutter tzedach mitzvah because it's not so terrible, and this is not, and this is also. But then we ask the question, what's the difference, Take? So the difference is here that by a kesher in kal without the kavanah of kayama, it's not even chotzi malacha, and therefore they didn't even make a gzeira because you didn't do anything of it yet. And Mashenke, by the case of akira anocha, you did a chotzi malacha, and that's why it is. Now, be'emes, this chidush that we're saying here, that the gather of the kavanah by kesher is that makes the chshivas of the kesher. The kavanah that it should say, that makes it into a kesher. That makes the kesher a davar choshev. Which is a chidush, look about the way we learn kipshuta. Learn kipshuta that it's a tnai. Kesher is the malacha, the making the kesher. Ma'isa if you hold it, has to be a double knot. And the kavanah is a tnai. When are you also chai midaraisa if you have that kavanah? But we're saying a different pshat. We're saying that this is what makes the malacha. There's a difference that comes out between these two pshatim. And the chidush, what we're saying is, if the whole reason of the kavanah of kesher shechal yom is the kavanah that's there, and that gives the whole reason is the chshivas that gives to the kesher. What happens if there's another way there is a chshivas in the kesher? Another way. And that is if you do a kesher, a mitzvah kesher. The kesher itself is a mitzvah. See, what we're talking now, if you're doing a kesher with tzedach mitzvah, like in the case of the Gemara, you did the kesher with tzedach mitzvah. They wanted to measure to see if it's tomei, if it's like they say tomei. In halacha, they wanted like, but the kesher itself is not a mitzvah. But what happens if the kesher itself is a mitzvah? Now, mitzvah seyach shevei, we know it says mitzvah seyach shevei, that if you do something for a mitzvah, that gives it the chshivas. So, if you learn that the kavanah is just a zaytik azach, it's a side thing. In order to be chayav, you have to have a mind that should stay forever. So what's the chilek if it's a mitzvah or not? You didn't have a mind, so it's not chayav, not osam midaraisa. But if there is a kavanah, the reason is because that gives the kesher chshivas. So could be the svara would be that in the case of a kesher shel mitzvah, that mitzvah itself gives it chshivas. Ubemele, you would be chayav even by a kesher shein shel kol yom if it's for a kesher shel mitzvah. Now, could be not 100%, could be b'deichek that even if you learn it's a tnai, maybe also it would be chayiv if it's tzedach mitzvah l'mashal. And what would be the svara behind it? Maybe the pshat is that if you learn the other way that it's only a condition, so the kesher itself, kesher that's there, the way you made it, is already choshev. Not the machshava makes it choshev, but the machshava makes it more choshev. Could be that's the pshat, and that's why it's chayiv. So the fizeh, what happens if it's a kesher shel mitzvah? You could also say it makes it more choshev, but that's already a deichek to say. The pashas would be if it's only a condition, then even if it's a kesher shel mitzvah, you still wouldn't be chayiv. But if it's to give chshivas to the kesher, so a mitzvah gives a chshivas because mitzvah say achshavei. So you can do that too. Now it says in Shulchan Aruch, and I'm going to use it. I did before also. Al Rebbe's Lashon, Yisim Atofresh and Nun Aleph Sivov. when you have to tie the lulav, so it says if you didn't tie it before Yontif, he says tie it on Yontif, but he says aval oser lasis al niva al gabe kesher b'Yontif on Yontif. You cannot make a knot and a bow. Keep mishein cheshish la'atira yelamis. Since when you do that, you don't plan to take it apart, so it is oser. So even though it's on the kesher chayomer, it's even though it's only al gabe, it's aniva al gabe kesher aniva. Nevertheless, since you're planning to leave it, it's oser. From here it comes out that had you had a mind to take it apart, it would be mutter, because it doesn't have the kesher shekayomer aspect. It's a mitzvah. So from here we see that the mitzvah doesn't make it choshev. But that's not such a big raya, because there's no real mitzvah to make the kesher. It's only mitzvah and amufchar laged aluv. To put the lulav and the together is only a mitzvah and amufchar. Anyway, after everything is said and done, what comes out from here that we have a big difference in the gather of the malacha of hitzo with akira and anocha, akira with ada anocha, anocha and akira, versus the union of kesher shein and shakayomer. That's the reason why kesher shein and shakayomer, let's say the mitzvah, you're allowed. Now, based on this, we'll go back to the beginning and answer why the seder in the Mishnah is pekekin and then maiden din and then kesher. Now, pekekin, we said we know why it's first, because first of all, it's the first thing that happened. Second of all, it's the biggest chidush that you're allowed to do it, even not let's say the mitzvah. But we ask the shaila, why is maiden din and then kesher? It should have been the opposite, seemingly because first they tied and then they measured, and also seemingly there's a bigger chidush in the fact that you could measure the gabe kesher. So the answer based on what we said before is like this. We said before that the kesher she'ein shel kayome, that the chachamim aset, is not part of the malacha. The kesher she'ein shel kayome is not part of the malachas of Keshira deraisa. The iser, why you're not allowed to make a kesher she'ein shel kayome, is not because you did part of the malacha deraisa, chotzi malacha. It's only because it's daime. We said it looks, but they looked at it. It looks like an iser deraisa, but mitzad the pool of the Keshira itself, it's not also. It's only because we compare it to something else, to a malacha asura. But not that this is part of it. It has no connection to it. It means like this. If it wouldn't be similar, there's no reason to make this kesher asur. Kesher she'ein shel kayome. Medida. What is the reason for medida? Why is measuring asur? It's not because there's a shaychus of malacha deraisa. It's not part of a malacha deraisa. It's not even similar to malacha deraisa. The whole yesod is l'chatchilu midrabanan. What's the yesod? We said because it's ma'aseh chayil v'zilzol Shabbos, because it looks like it's a weekday thing. It's not because of anything else. It's an isur that the chachamim put on that itself. Now, this point that this is an isur that the chachamim made mitzad atzma is in a prat worse than an isur that's made because of something else. See, the isur of Keshira, we said, is because of something else. Not it's exeda, you might come to that, but it looks like a deraisa. So we looked at it and we said, since it's like a deraisa, we make it osir. But in itself, it doesn't have the quality of an isur at all. Mashenkin, medida, which is only osir madarabona, which seems to be even less because it's not even like a malacha, but it has a quality of itself. In its own right, it's a problem. In a lower level, has nothing to do with the deraisa. But that makes it more choshev. That makes it more svara to be osir. Similar to we have the tshuva in the Chassam Sofer. Chassam Sofer writes in the tshuva of Chaim Sof Simen Kuf Mem Hey, he says that the second day of Shavuos is more chomor than the second day of the Ari Yom Tevin. He gives the reason why. The reason we have 2 days Yom Tov started because they didn't know which day was the real Yom Tov, so it was a suffix. So they had to have 2 days. That's what it's a sveka deraisa. The Rambam says Shavuos, it was never a suffix. The reason why it was a suffix by regular Yom Tov, because let's say Pesach, the 15th day of Nisan, you have to know when Chachamim made Rosh Chodesh, because every month the Bezdin would make Rosh Chodesh, and places were far didn't get the message by the time the 15th day came. They didn't know it's today, the 15th, or tomorrow, so they had to keep both. Shavuos doesn't depend on the day of the month. It depends on Sfire. It depends on Pesach, which depends on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. By the time they came to Shavuos, everyone already knew when Rosh Chodesh Nisan was, so they shouldn't have to have 2 days. So the Rambam says the reason is we shouldn't make any differences. Yom Tov. Chachamim decided it's not because of it's a suffix. They made a din of Shavuos 2 days. It should be like all the Yom Tov. So he says, look at it. All the Yom Tov come from a suffix of the second days of Yom Tov. Shavuos doesn't come from a suffix, so it's a vaday. Now, the other days are Sofik Deraisa. When they made the Sofik, there was a Sofik Deraisa. Shavuos is not a Sofik Deraisa. It's the Rabbanon, but it's a Vadai Derabanan. The Rabbanon made it without a Sofik. And there is a Chumre. He says there's more Chumr. And the Vadai Derabanan over a Sofik Deraisa. Al Derech Zeh, we could say here also. Anything that's also because of a Din Deraisa, true, it's because of a Din Deraisa, but this is on the Rabbanon. So, but nevertheless, it has a Kula because it's not also on its own. It's also because of something else. But Medida is also on its own. The Rabbanon said this is something we don't want. So that should be in a certain prat, should be more chomer. So when the Chachamim were matir et l'tzerech mitzvah, it's a bigger chiddush. They were matir Medida versus that they were matir Keshira shein shokal yomeh. And therefore the lashon is first Medida and Medida and then Keshrin, because Medida is a bigger, and it's all based on what we said before from Tosfos, that when you have single words, then the chiddush comes first. So the first thing is Pekekin, that's a big chiddush b'shal halacha, that even not tzerech mitzvah. Then we have a second chiddush, that Medida is also muter l'tzerech mitzvah, even though Medida has a chumrah that it's an isur of a zilzul Shabbos and that's so. And then another din is that's not such a big chiddush, that the Keshira Kesher shein shekol yom is also muter l'tzerech mitzvah because it's not such a big chiddush. And this answers this whole kasha base, but it's all connected to the whole gather of what the gather of Keshira is, and as far as the malacha that I said, the malacha derabanan, etc., etc. This is all b'negeya the nigla pshat. But we know that there is nigla v'teira, the revealed part of teira, and then there is the pnimis hateira, the deeper pshat, the kabbalistic, the seidas hateira. You know what it says in the Zohar? That nigla and pnimius are like a gufa and a neshama. The revealed part of teira is called gufa deraisa, it says in Zohar, the body of the teira, and the pnimis hateira is called nishmosa deraisa, the neshama of teira. And therefore, everything that's there in Nigla, everything has the pnimis pshat. Doesn't mean that we know everything, all the pnimis. That when Mashiach will come, we'll learn that. Rasha says in Shirashirim, we're going to learn the time of Torah, the depth of Torah, the status of the Torah, we'll learn. But still, there are svarim in Kabbalah, and there are the Kabbalim that explained different mishnahs, different dinim in Nigla, al pi Kabbalah, al pi Chassidus, al pi pnimius. So the Rabbi here explains also this mishnah al pi pnimius to answer this shaila. The shaila, as we said, why is the Seder Pekekin made it in the Keshrin? First Pekekin that you stuff the hole, and then made it in is the measurement that you could measure, and then is Keshrin that you could tie. And the Rebbe explains it like this: Bahagdim. The Loshen is a strange Loshen in the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, from Divrei Lomadnu, we learn out from their words, Shapekekin made it in the Keshrin Shabbos. That we stuff a hole, we measure, and we tie on Shabbos. What do you mean? Should have said, from here we learn out that muter lifkek, you're allowed to stop a hole in the wall on Shabbos. We're allowed to measure on Shabbos l'tzerich mitzvah. We're allowed to tie and not on Shabbos a kesher comes l'tzerich mitzvah. Muter, why is it peikikin? As if mashmeh that this is what we're supposed to do. This is what is done. Peikikin, learn out. So Rabbi says, Al Pichsidis, yes, we'll explain that. This is the end of Mesechta Shabbos. And we said before that there's a connection to the beginning and the end. The beginning of Mesechta Shabbos starts with the Malachas Heitzor. We said, Dinim of Heitzor, Akira, and Anoch, all kinds of the Dinim Heitzor. So here we have all the Rishonim, Tosfos, and all the Rishonim ask, why does it start with why the Mesechta Shabbos start with the Dinim of Heitzor? When Heitzor really, in the list of the Malachas, Perek Lav Gadol is from the last. So why you hear the Mishnah start with Mesechta? And there is an answer, Tosfos, all the Rishonim in Nigel the answer. But Al Pichsidis, the answer is based on this. There's a medrash that says it's in Medrash Rabbah, Beishis Rabbah, Parshim Aleph, Hey, and Shmeis Rabbah. It says, I certain applicators asked Rabbi Akiva, if it's true what you're saying, that Eibishter also keeps Shabbos, how does he make winds? How does he make it rain? How does he make things grow? So Rabbi Akiva answered him that the Gabbat Eibishter, the whole world is one reshus. So it's not that you're taking from one reshus to another. So a person is not allowed to take from one reshus to another. But by the Eibishter, so one reshus. That's the answer. Now the question is very obvious. Meforshim asked the question. If I tell you, ask the question, Shmeis Rabbah. The Marzuah asked the question. They answer different answers. But what the kasha is, this is only an answer how the Eibishter allowed to carry. You ask him, how does Eibishter make things come from one place to another? He's scared. He'll answer, oh, it's all one Rishus by Eibishter. But he asks the Shaila, how does he make it grow? What is the growing, which is one of the Malacha Shabbos? How does that got to do with the union of carrying? So must be that the Malacha of Hitzah is the Yesod of all the Malachas. All the Malachas on Shabbos is based on the concept of Hitzah. And since by the Eibush that is not Shaykh Dinyan of Yisor, everything else is bottled. Now, what does that mean? Why is Hitzah the Yisod of all the Malachas? The Hitzah from Rishus HaYochid to Rishus Rabim, the answer is Rishus HaYochid means the Rishus of Yechidai Shel Eilam, the Rishus of the Eibishter, Yochid. Rishus HaRabim, Rabim is many, plural. The Welt is plural. It's not Achdus. You don't see the Achdus of the world. So Rishus HaRabim is the Welt. Certainly when it's bad things, Klippus in the world is certainly Rishus HaRabim. And Rishus HaYochid is Yechidai Shel Eilam. Any melacha that the person does, what he's doing is he's taking out from the reshus of the Eibishter to the reshus of Klippus. That's it. If a person cooks on Shabbos, grows on Shabbos, it's all Hitzah. In the Ruchnezik sense, it's all Hitzah. He's taking out from the reshus hayochid, Yechidai Shel Eilam into the reshus Rabbi. And that's why if there's no din Hitzah by the Eibishter, the Mela all the malachas don't count. They don't accomplish any Hitzah. That's what it is. So this is the reason why the first dinim in Mesechta Shabbos are b'negei Hitzah, because since this is the beginning of Shabbos, so everything is the beginning sets the tone. Tells you Beruchnias what is the all the malachas of Shabbos is Hitzah. Now, just like we say that the beginning it contains everything from further, we have another thing the opposite also. Hakol heil chacharachitim. It says by a star. The Gemara says in Barachas Daf Yud Beis that if you have a star, there's a stira between the beginning and the end. Anyway, you go after the end. So the same thing, everything. The end, just like you put the tone in the beginning, the end is the sachakol, so the end also. So here we're talking about the end of Shabbos, of Mesechta Shabbos. So just like over there is the yesod of what Shabbos is, the end also. This end of the Mishnah in Shabbos, that Pekikin made it in vacation, is the end of Mesechta Shabbos, is telling us a yesod in what the gather of Shabbos is, alpi pnimi sonyonim, alpi chassidus. And dafke in this order, as we will see up chassidus. And the pshat is like this. It says in many places, all starts with Chaim Vital writes this in his Hagoas on Zayar, Chedik Beis, Sheyam with Beis. In Chassidus, Lukut Torah and different Maimorim is brought down. That we know that on Shabbos there are three sections to Shabbos. One is the night of Shabbos. Sometimes it's called Mailel Shabbat or Leil Shabbos. You have Yom Shabbat, the day of Shabbos, and you have the Shabbos Mincha time, which is called in the Zayar. It's called Raive de Kol Raivin, the Rotzen of all. It's saying that's a much higher level. What are the different levels? Al Pichsidis, Al Kabbalah, Al Pichsidis. It's like this. We know that there are four elements: Atzilus, Bria, Yitzir, Asiyah. Bria is the first level of Bria. There are different levels of creation, of the beginning of a yesh, the beginning of a being already that's already a mitzvah for itself. Elam Bria. Then you go to Yitzir, Asiyah. You come to this final, this world. The world on top of Bria, which is not part of the Bria, that's more like the Beta, part of the Creator. That is Elam HaAtzilus. Now in Atzilus we have the seven midas: Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Yesod, and Malchus. And we always in Chassidus and Kabbalah divide it into two. The six Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Yesod are called Zo, Zayin Aleph, which is Rosh Hashanah, Ze'er Ampin. And then you have the seventh one, which is Malchus, which is the lowest. When we say from Atzilus comes the Bria, since Malchus is the last of Atzilus, so Malchus is the one that works with Bria. And the Taka says that the creation comes from Sfiras HaMalchus, and it says Malchus comes, whichever way we'll explain it up to Kabbalah, here's not the place, that Malchus is Yered into Bria, Yitzir, Asiyah, to Memvara Beruri, and it says, oh, it's Malchus is connected. So Malchus comes down to Elam Bria. It says on Shabbos, there's Aliyah Sa'elamis. Elamis go up. So even right away, Friday night, Malchus goes back to Atzilus. Like this, during the week, Malchus is within this world, goes back to Atzilus. Now, since the Elamis get their chayas from Malchus, that has to be. So even Shabbos, it gets its chayas from Malchus. But Shabbos, because Malchus goes back to Atzilus, So it has a higher madrege. So what's Meir? What shines in this world Friday night when Shabbos starts? The way Malchus is in Atzilus. And that's a very high madrege. Now, great tzaddikim feel it. And that's the level where it says is Maila de Shabbat or Leil Shabbos is that starts. But afterwards, you go higher. So comes the day of Shabbos, there's a higher madrege. Comes the level of Zod Atzilus. Zod, which you said is 6 meters, which is higher. So since as you go higher and higher. So what shines in the world? Not only Sfiras HaMalchus of Atzilus, but also Zod Atzilus shines. Then as the day progresses, and you come to the time of Raiv, they call it Raivin, then comes a madrege even higher than Zod. There's a madrege which is higher than Zod and Malchus, and it's higher that it's miyachid, combines Zod and Malchus together. It's mekasher, Zod and Malchus together. That's the reason of the Kabbalah why Friday night, I don't know if in all Mischayos, but in many Mischayos, you say in the Shmones Esrei, you say V'yanuchu vo, in Shachas you say V'yanuchu voi, and by Mincha you say V'yanuchu vom. And the reason is because Friday night is Malchus. Malchus is always called as Nukve. Zo is called Zochar. And Malchus is Nukve, it's Nekeva. So we say V'yanuchu vo, Wash Nekeva. Feminine. Shachar is when you have the Gilui of Zo, which is Zochar, you say V'yanuchu vei, it's masculine. And by Mincha time, that's when you have the combination of Zo and Malchus, the Chibur and the Keshira both. That's when we see V'yanuchu vom. Bom, them, Loshan Rabin, because it's both together. Now, therefore, since Friday night is Meir Malchus in the world, as it is in Atzilus it says there's no such thing as Klippe. Klippe is Yesh. Bria is the beginning of a Yesh. In Atzilus, it's not. That's why the pasuk where it says Le Yigurcha Ra, there's no Ra, it goes on Atzilus. There's no, it doesn't mean bad, evil like we think of evil. It means any mitzias other than Davish. Atzilus is called Elam HaLakus, Elam HaAchdus. There it's only Achdus Hashem. So during the week, we said that Malchus comes down into this world, away from Atzilus. Mitzad Bria, Yitzir Asiyah, there's a possibility of Klippe. So Klippe is Tvisas Mokim, is Tvisas Mokim. Shabbos, since Sfiras HaMalchus goes up to Atzilus, and the highest in the world comes from Sfiras HaMalchus, the way it's in Atzilus, so the Klippes are bottled. Shabbos, it says the Klippes are bottled. Friday night, as soon as it starts Shabbos, and we see that, we say that in Kagavna, all Klippes are bottled on Shabbos. Why? Because Atzilus, Malchus of Atzilus is Meir, the way it's in Atzilus is Meir. Now, true, this is what happens, but we know everything that happens needs also a part of Aveda. A Yid has to work on it, and it doesn't happen by itself. It has to do Aveda. So in this Inyan, we also find Aveda. We find the Gemara says that a Yid who says Vayichulu Kol Keche is Nasa Shutav LaKadosh Baruch Hu L'Maaseh Bereishis. You become a partner to the Eibush in the creation. What do you mean become a partner to the Eibush in the creation? The Eibush created the world. We don't become partners. So Chassidus says the pshat like this. David should create the world, but what he wants is that he gave us a job to finish off the job. He wants the klippah should get out of the world. He made it with klippah. He made it in such a way that we should reach a point when Mashiach will come, the klippahs will get out. But how do we get the klippahs out? We have to work on it. And when we work on it, we finish off the job that David started. David started the creation, made most of the creation, but left the piece over. That fits to what the Chazal saying of Basra, that when David created the world, Ruach Tzfeinis Ein Misaveres. He didn't finish off the northern side. Whatever it should mean, Begashmi is not, I have to think about it. But Chassidus says like this: Tzofein represents Klippe. The Pasuk says, Mitzofein Tiposach Haro. Tzofein is Klippe. David created the world that the Tzofein side is open. There could be Klippe. He didn't finish it off. He didn't finish off the creation. Finished off would be complete, no Klippe. He left the concept of Tzofein open. And what he wants is that we should do things to get rid of the klippe. And therefore, during the week, the tzofan side is open and there's klippe there. When it comes Shabbos, the Yidden, through keeping Shabbos, become a part, they finish off the creation. They become a shoot of the Ma'aseh. David created the world. He created it in a way that there's part of the world that's not finished, the tzofan, which is the fact that there's a possibility of klippe. And the Yid, by keeping Shabbos, becomes the shoot of the Ma'aseh. So when the Yid starts off Shabbos, keep Shabbos, the first thing, and that happens right away, Friday night, Shabbos at night, Friday night. So there is no more opening there. Like this during the week, there's an opening. The Tzofa side is open, it's not stuffed up. And we have the ability of making that it should be closed up, no clip, but the Tzofa side should be closed up. And that happens right away as soon as Shabbos comes in. The fact that we're Makabel Shabbos, so we keep Shabbos. But then, as a reward for this Aveda, comes the next morning, the Eibishter gives us more. Since we did things to take away the klippe, which means to have the Malchus the way it's in Atzilus, which there is no klippe, come here and get rid of the klippe, the schar is that we get a higher level of Eir. And that shines the level of Zoda Atzilus. And then during the day of Shabbos, we keep Shabbos more, then we go even higher. So we come to a level which is higher than Zohar Malchus, and is meyached them, puts them together. Even in Nigla, we find such a thing that our doing helps Shabbos. The Pasuk says, Laseis es HaShabbos, to make Shabbos. Even though the Gemara says Shabbos is Mekachev Akaima, Shabbos is there from beginning, and is there, not like Yontev that depends on when the Bez made the Shchedesh, or they make the Yontev. If they make the Shchedesh today, then 15 days later is Yontev, so it's them. But Shabbos is Mekachev Akaima. Nevertheless, the Pasuk says Laseis es HaShabbos, to make Shabbos. There is something in our Aveda that we add to the union of Shabbos. Actually, in a certain halacha, we see it. It's a funny thing, interesting. We find that if someone is on a trip and he forgot which day he is and he doesn't know Shabbos, so he counts 6 days and then he makes Shabbos. And the Radva says that it's that I say Shabbos. That means that his counting made Shabbos. So there is such a thing as with something that you do, you make Shabbos. But that's just an emes to what we're saying here. But the Yitzer was Aveda makes, so there's first Aveda that he does is makes the Shabbos by keeping just the action, keeping Shabbos. Shabbos comes in and his Makabel Shabbos makes Malchus go back to Atzilus, and the Gili in the world is from Malchus Atzilus. The next morning it's already the Zohar Atzilus higher, and then comes to later on is the level of the Chibur of both. Now that's the reason of Chassidus why at the end of Mesechta Shabbos, which means the end, the goal, the highest level of keeping Shabbos is, even though we're learning halachas of Shabbos. But the halachas of Shabbos, it says, we know that so it's Maise. So what happens? So we're talking here about the end. The beginning of the Mesechta is telling you that you have to be careful of Shabbos, because if not, there is a Heitzah, you're taking away from Hashem. Comes on the end of Shabbos and it tells you that when you keep Shabbos and you finish the whole Mesechta, it doesn't mean only learning. You finished it, you're doing the whole Shabbos the way it's supposed to do, you will reach 3 levels. And the 3 levels are Peikekin, Omededim, and Keshira. Stuffing up the hole, measuring and tying in this order. And it says that's what you do. It's not the check you're allowed to. Every Shabbos, this is what happens. And this is it. Leil Shabbos, Friday night, as we said, you cause the Aliyah Sa'ilamus, Aliyah Samalchus, Malchus goes up, and the klippos are bottled. Which means, what does it mean, klippos are bottled? That hole that's there in the creation, the tzofn hole, that's there that is a mokim for klippos, we stuff up. No more hole. That's Peikekin. Peikekin stuff up the hole. Then you reach the level of Zoda Atzilus, which are the midas. Zo, we said, is the 6 midas. Meidadin. Meidadin comes from the same word. From the word midah, like it says midah she'oda meidad, meidadin lei. So meidadin is a remes for midas. So this is the seder of the end of Shabbos. To tell you what is Shabbos. Shabbos is fake, and you stuff up the whole of the klippos. And then you reach the level, that's Malchus, going back to Atzilus. Then you reach the level of meidadin. You have the midas. And then you go even higher to the level of the kus, which is higher than Zohar Malchus, which combines them both. That's Keshrin. You tie it into one. That the Eir, which is higher than Zohar Malchus, and it's Mekasher Zohar Malchus, that's what shines. That's what the union of Keshira is when you make 2 things into one, like we said before. And by doing that, you Mekasher all the Eilumis, that Bechlal, you bring down such a madrege that all the Eilumis become one. Like this, we have Tzilis, Bri, Yetzira, Si, and this is Welt. They become one, because if the real level of Gilei Lukus, there's only one. The Eibush, there's only one Rishus HaYachid, and that's the Rishus of the Eibush. We can connect the world with the Chiddush Shalom. And this happens on Shabbos. And obviously, from Shabbos, from Mamshach, this a whole week to a certain degree. So here we have the Biur Alpi Nigle. Why it say that Loshen in the Mesechta, the end of the Mesechta is Made it in the Keshira, and also Al Chassidus, why it says these three Lashonos. Want to see what to do? Want to see what to do now? I stopped it, but now I don't know. I'm afraid to push any button, not to erase it, not to ruin it. I just made end. Yeah, I ended.
That's it.
That now.
Okay, yeah, it's ended.
Yeah, now what is
End recording for all. You did that?
No.